Welcome to the ChangeMakers podcast, produced by City Current and powered by Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services.
This show shares personal stories and insight from those who are leading by example, fueling positive change and making a difference so we can learn and do the same.
We cover life lessons, business advice, passion, and purpose.
Now here's your host, Jeremy Park.
Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services is proud to power the ChangeMakers podcast. We're a people-first company that protects what matters most, the families, businesses, and trailblazers that keep our community going. As one of the nation's top independent insurance firms, Higginbotham is a single-source solution for business insurance, employee benefits, HR services, and personal insurance that's customized for you. We're here to serve you, the people you care about, and your community. Call 866-377-1959 or visit higginbotham.com.
Welcome to the ChangeMakers podcast, produced by City Current and powered by Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. On this episode, we're talking about taking an asset-based approach to lift global communities, anti-human trafficking, agriculture, education, powerful ideas, and so much more. That's why we're honored to have with us Gabrielle Thompson, President and CEO of Ideas. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So honored to be here today.
Well, you have a lot of really powerful storylines. The fun of ChangeMakers is that we get to know you personally. We talk about where you grew up and your journey throughout. So let's go ahead and dive in. Give us some background on where you grew up.
Great. So I was born in Los Angeles. I come from a family of artists. My dad owned a production studio. My mom was a professional dancer, grew up in the creative space. And then we actually relocated to Nashville for my parents to both write a book, but we ended up staying. And so that's how I moved to Nashville. I was about 6 years old when that happened.
That's cool. So growing up in a family of artists, what was that like in terms of, did they, pull you in and say, hey, let's be a part of the productions, and early age you're immersed in? What was that like?
It was really amazing because my parents really tried to find ways to cultivate all of our creativity. They're very much purpose-driven and passion-driven people. And so they really were intentional about trying to identify the different passions and interests that all four of us had. Because I come from, there's four of us in the family, 3 siblings. And so it was really great to see them really invest in us in that way. And that's really how I was able to find my own personal calling and passion, is growing up with them. They had a lot of photo books, and they were also both passionate about, people internationally. And so as a child, I would look through these old photo books that had people living in places all over the world. And it just drew my curiosity in that moment. And that's when I started really asking questions about, how do people live around the world? How do other children my age? I was probably about 6 years old when I started looking at these different photo books and being so curious about the lives of other people.
Where are you in the lineup in terms of siblings?
I'm number 2. Yeah.
Are you close with your siblings? Like where are they in the picture now in terms of what they do?
Yes. So we all have some creativity in us. So that is one thing. The artist piece did pass on to the 4 of us. But I'm very close with them, very close to my family. My brother has his PhD. He lives in North Carolina. He works for Amazon. My little brother runs a ministry here in Tennessee. And then my sister is a supply chain expert for FedEx. And so a lot of different endeavors that each of us pursued.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. So when you look at growing up in a family of creatives and especially artists, talk about kind of that side of it, of the balance of creatives and business, and what that was like to kind of sit together at the dinner table.
Well, interestingly enough, so my father, although he is a very creative person. He's also an entrepreneur. So throughout my whole life, he started many different businesses. So the studio in LA was a studio that he kind of created and crafted and had the vision for. And then when we actually fully settled in Tennessee, he created another business. So he's throughout my whole life, he's been an entrepreneur. And really, I think that one thing that is not talked about a lot is how creative entrepreneurs have to be. And so really, I see the role of creativity with business being very powerful. That's where a lot of innovation can come from. And now in my professional world, leading organizations, I find that a lot of my creative outlet is actually through the form of being innovative with the nonprofit that I'm running, innovative with programs. And it requires that level of creativity. And so I think that there needs to be more dialogue and discussion about the value of that intersection between creativity and business and how it can actually be a type of an art form. For example, when I'm creating a program, it's almost like I'm creating a piece of art because you have to start from scratch. You have to do, kind of view what you want it to look like in the end product and then kind of work backwards for what the vision is. So I think it was a really powerful thing. I'm very thankful I grew up with a family of artists and creatives because it's helped me really think outside of the box in both my personal and professional life.
Yeah, that's a great point too. What's a tradition like when you look back for you and your three siblings, and then obviously for your parents together as a family? What's a fun family tradition that stands out?
I would say, so my father, when he was 14 years old, he left home and unfortunately became unhoused and was put in the foster care system and then left that. And so when I was growing up, and my parents were big givers, they really believed that any sort of provision that they received was really meant to be given to others. And so one tradition that I hold very dear to me is that we would always engage in giving in some capacity, but they really wanted to incorporate us as kids in that process. So whether that was, actually going and feeding people that were unhoused, or one year for Christmas, they gave each of us $100 cash that we were really meant to think about, pray about where we wanted to give that. And so what we ended up doing is driving around. And if there was a home that we felt like really needed some love and provision on Christmas, we would just put the cash in their mailbox. We would also create care packages for people that were unhoused and go distribute them. And so that was really meaningful for me, and I think was really foundational, was the level of giving back to the community and really contributing and really, creating that foundation for all that we have is really meant to be shared and is a blessing that we can give to others.
Is there it doesn't have to be specific, but like advice or sayings that you kind of have in the back of your head for your father, your mother, in terms of like just their advice and recommendations and role modeling for you?
Because my parents were so purpose driven in the way that they raised us, all four of us kids really had some very creative, interesting ideas, and they never discouraged us. They always really wanted us to be purpose-driven, passion-driven people. And I really think of that in my own life. I've really tried to, everything I do has a purpose, and not wanting to have, for example, that I want that to be my driver. And I think that they really instilled that within all of us is, what is your driver? What is your passion? How do you zone into that? And it's okay if it doesn't look the way that the world wants it to look. And that I really have always appreciated. And I really see that now exemplified with my siblings and I being, grown in the ways that we've crafted our lives to be very much focused on what we're passionate about, what we feel drawn towards, what gives us purpose.
What was the transition like? And obviously you're young, but from Los Angeles, from the West Coast to Nashville?
It was a little interesting because for example, we came here a few months before, and we went to Fall Creek Falls to camp, and I was playing in the playground, and there was this little girl there that I was trying to play with, but I couldn't understand what she was saying. And so I remember I went back to my mom and I'm like, she's speaking a different language. I can't understand her, trying to communicate. My mom said, that's a Southern accent. And I had never heard a Southern accent before. So that was really curious for me. Another thing would be my parents really prioritize, a lot of very fresh, healthy food, everything made from scratch. And so I remember we ate at Cracker Barrel, and I had never had canned vegetables before. And so I remember when they brought out the green beans, covered in butter and all that good stuff, I was like, what is this? I had never experienced a canned vegetable. So little experiences like that, or in Los Angeles, that's not the same culture here for Christianity and churches. And so I was thinking, how are there enough people for all of these churches here? And it was really interesting. My mother, actually, she didn't want any of us to have a Southern accent. And I do find a Southern accent quite charming, but she would move us out of classrooms if the teacher had a Southern accent. So those are some pieces that were very culturally different for us. I know for my parents as well. They, when we came here in the 90s, the restaurant scene wasn't as wonderful it is now. There was not as big of an emphasis on arts outside of music. And so that was one thing that was challenging for them was, that was before the Frisk Museum. That was before we had some of this more emphasis on other types of arts outside of music.
Well, and Nashville now is very much Hollywood. And so I think Nashville now, there's so many influences from Los Angeles and the West Coast and things. And so it's quite different now, obviously. But it's funny as you're talking, because I'm thinking we just ate a Cracker Barrel on our drive back from Texas yesterday. My wife has, a very thick Southern accent, which I absolutely love, but I tease her for it, and it's hilarious. And every time we go out to LA to visit friends and stuff, I have to order for her sometimes because it's like, what did you say? And so it's like a running joke. Yes. But, growing up, because I grew up in Texas, and we had to, for acting, you had to take diction classes, and you had to be able to speak to remove the Southern accent, because going out to Los Angeles for acting, that was a big part of it, is losing the accents. And so I think when you talk about the creative as a business, there are actually a lot of nuances that go into that most people just don't think about, including how you talk and act and mannerisms and eating. And there's a lot that just goes into it. Obviously, cultural differences between regions, but also professionally how that plays out. Talk about from your perspective in terms of grade school and then going into college. Give us a little bit of that vantage point in terms of what was your focus going into college, because obviously for what you do now, globally focused, was that always a priority?
Yes. So at that point, when I started really asking the questions of it really began as other girls my age. How do other girls my age live around the world? And then I started recognizing, and I was probably, as I started discovering this, 7, 8 years old, 6 when it first started, really started then asking the questions, and then recognizing that there were girls my age that were not allowed to go to school, didn't have the ability to go to school, would never necessarily become literate, and really were in situations like child marriage, things like that were really out of their control and were really based on where they lived, where they were born. And that injustice began where it just really was so deep inside of me that I thought, I want to make a difference for sisters, my sisters, the girls like me. There's nothing that is different about us outside of the fact that they were born in X location. And so really from about the time I was 8 years old, I was extremely focused on, I want to work and serve internationally to really help women and children and really bring about any sort of, economic provision, breaking down chains of gender-based violence, the issues of poverty, illiteracy, et cetera. So I was really focused from that time. So really about, I would say as a child, I was very zoned into, I want to work and serve internationally. So then it was the course of what does that look like? Because there was no one in my life that I had experience with, that I'd ever met, that had an actual role and vocation of working and serving internationally. And the only people that I knew of were missionaries, and that was not where I felt like I was wanting to serve. And so from that point on, I really tried to focus on what are the opportunities within the international space for me to serve? Of course, that is where I really found NGOs is the way to go. That's where I need to serve, is working for a nonprofit international organization. And so from the time I really started high school, recognizing that at that season of my family's life, we were very, very poor and really did not have any resources. And so I knew that my parents would not be able to provide any funds for me to go to college. And so my focus, as soon as I hit high school, was how can I basically be as good of a student as possible to be able to have full rides for everything that I want to do, with also the caveat of I was trying to find opportunities to work internationally already at that young age. So whether that could be volunteering internationally, interning somewhere. And so really that kind of began the process of really honing in and focusing on that. So my first international trip was funded actually by a foundation for youth that have a passion for international travel and serving people internationally. So that I really worked at trying to find creative ways and creative opportunities to be able to start honing in on that talent and expertise. And then by the time I got to college, I had already traveled relatively extensively, volunteered at different orphanages internationally, et cetera. And so by that time, immediately upon freshman year of college, I was already very focused. And that was really helpful for me because then I was able to request things from my professors. For example, I knew what I wanted to do. So when they would ask to write a research paper, I would say, can I write it on this topic of something I'm passionate about internationally? And so I was able to, by the time I was 20, presenting at conferences within those realms. So really, it's been a very long process, but it started very intentionally at a young age, which is why I think I'm at the age I'm at, able to lead organizations, because it's really been a lifelong journey for me. And I've been very focused towards what I personally feel called to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's remarkable. And I think it's also rare. I mean, so many kids grow up not knowing even after college, like, what am I passionate about? What am I going to do? And so the fact that you were focused in with a higher purpose early on, guiding that path, to your point, then puts you in a very different place in terms of your leadership ability based on the experiences you've already had. And so tremendous for you to be able to make an impact. When you look at that first trip going off on your own, that can be scary. It can be amazing. It can be obviously so many learning opportunities and relationship building opportunities. What was that first trip like for you in terms of really all those emotions kind of playing out, but also obviously reaffirming the direction that you want to go with your life and career?
So I will say the first trip I went on was to Germany, and part of the foundation that was granting this was for young people to attend a World Trade Center summit. And so I actually went there to attend a World Trade Center event as a teenager, not really knowing what I was doing. And so that was less of the space of where I really wanted to be in regard to serving vulnerable populations. But it was so helpful for me to have that just experience of just that first step of what does it mean to cross the ocean, and really connecting. The value of that first trip was really meeting people from across the globe that are working in some type of international space. Of course, a lot in international trade, which was still very helpful, but it opened a lot of doors for me in regard to relationships, even at that early age. So, for example, I met a family there who lived in India, and they did transportation of materials through cargo ships. And so we really bonded with them, and they actually invited me to come stay with them in Mumbai, which I planned on going. And unfortunately, 2 days before was the terrorist attack in Mumbai against Americans. So I had to cancel, but I was only 17 years old when I was going to go basically stay with an Indian family in Mumbai. But I would say that what's so interesting now that I look back is there is that level of being naive when you're young and you just trust the world. And now I'm far more conservative as it comes to travel. But now when I reflect back on those first few international trips, I think I felt generally safe because I just didn't think otherwise. And now I'm very conservative as it comes to that type of travel, but also the places I go now are a lot more dangerous and high risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's many people, but give me one that pops into your head first in terms of people who you've met along the way who have been a mentor and really helped open your eyes and guide you in the right direction for what you want to do with your career.
There's been a lot of people along the way, a lot of mentors, and I think that they've been in different spaces. So, for example, I've worked with an executive consultant for many years. He's been very helpful to really guide me in more of a leadership way. But also, I can think of there was an organization I worked with in Thailand that was a safe home for survivors, and the founder of that organization was in her late 70s and had moved to Thailand to establish this organization and serve. And so she was really helpful in regard to mentoring me in the trafficking space. But then I think about, I think there's not a lot of I think there needs to be, I'll rephrase that, there needs to be more interaction and collaboration and safe spaces for CEOs to come to share the hardships, the burdens of leadership, the things that they really don't want to talk to other people about, but they want to talk to a peer about. And so I would say there have been several older female CEOs that have really let me come under their wing to help guide me, especially in the early years when I was just 25 leading an organization, that really helped guide that process to me. And so, I do attribute a lot of where I am now to the people that have taken the time and the consideration to really walk with me, mentor me, and, teach me so much in the process. So it's hard to pick one because there have been so many in this journey, and I'm so thankful for them.
Yeah, I mean, the work you do globally, you're going to run across so many. And that's why I just think it's interesting, especially for you, when you look at where you are now and the journey you've gone through, so many people pouring into you, believing in you, helping you. I think it's an important piece of the equation for sure, because you don't get where you are alone, especially in the context of working to build community globally. Yeah. Talk about human trafficking, because I originally met you when you were focused on anti-human trafficking. And so talk about that as a passion and purpose for you, and then that will lead us into ideas.
Great. Well, really, what was really interesting for me as I've reflected more. So a few years ago, I found a paper that I had written when I was 19 years old. So that was about trafficking and trafficking around the globe and what that looks like. And I had really viewed trafficking when I had during my journey to be where I am. I really viewed trafficking as really the epitome of all of the other factors and that, like poverty, like lack of education, like lack of resources. That was really the what happens when you do not have these things is trafficking. And so I viewed that as really the top and one of the most important things in the world to really take a look at, because so much is affected and influenced by trafficking around the globe. And so but I never had thought that I would work in trafficking. And that was a really interesting journey for me, which I'll share briefly. I was at the time working in Costa Rica doing microloan development for female entrepreneurs in a very impoverished area of Costa Rica. And I got a call from a colleague. And again, I'm 25 at the time. I got a call from a colleague and she said, listen, there's an organization that's hiring for an executive director, but the CEO or the founder has been looking for 2 years and she hasn't been able to find anyone that really aligns. I think you should apply for the position. And I told her, I was like, I'm not qualified. I don't think I should apply. She's like, it doesn't hurt, just apply. So I applied, and the founder asked me to fly to Tennessee to meet with her at her house. And I did. And she opened the door and I guess just got a sense in her spirit and said, you're the one for the job. I know you are. She's like, the job is yours. And I was overwhelmed. I'm like, are you sure? Can you read my resume? Can we have a conversation? And then from there, I really just took some time to pray and process and talk to some of my advisors and my mentors, my counsel, and really felt like that moment of saying yes to that opportunity was really a buildup of my entire life and being passionate about that. It was really about stepping into the unknown, even though I was afraid and felt inadequate, of saying, yes, I will do this. And so from that point on began, almost a decade-long work of really investing in that space, creating programs, serving thousands of survivors, truly changed my life, changed my heart, and was a very, very meaningful part of my life. And although I don't work full time in trafficking anymore, it will always be a heartbeat for me as far as how I want to serve and who I want to serve.
Looking back at that time period, give me one special moment that stands out. Once again, hundreds and thousands of them, but what's one that just pops into your head?
Oh, there's so many, Jeremy, but one that I think would actually be really powerful is I had then been leading the organization for about 2 years. And one kind of offshoot program that we would do only when the opportunity presented itself and we had enough intel was to do raids. And so we had done a raid and we had been able to rescue 12 women from that particular raid, which was really powerful. And these women were trafficked from Nepal into India. And there was one particular woman, she was a mother. She was basically manipulated by a trafficker. They were very poor and manipulated by a trafficker saying, I can get you a job working at a hotel and you can make a lot of money. And she had children and a husband. And she was trafficked. Thankfully, the raid occurred. We were able to get her out. And then when I went back to Nepal a few months later, I visited her in her village. And what we had done is for certain survivors that really have the desire and the capacity, we will help give them kind of like a capacity grant. But we do that through chicken farming or through pigs. And so with her, she was very willing and very engaged. And one other kind of caveat there is when a woman is trafficked, especially if she's, well, period, trafficked at all, in those cultures, it's very hard for them to be accepted back into their community, into their family, with their husband. And so we were very impressed by the ability for her husband and her to really bring her back and love her and accept that had happened and walk with her in that. And so we had given her a capacity grant for 100 chickens. So we built her a chicken coop. We gave her the chickens. We gave her a year's worth of feed. And so by the time that I went to visit, the chickens were grown and she was thriving and she was making a sustainable income beyond even what her husband was bringing in, and so much joy and so much gratitude. And I think about her all the time because that is really the story of what we want for someone that has been trafficked, is for them to come out of trafficking, really have an opportunity to heal, but then really have an opportunity to create a way and a living for themselves and their families, which is the reason that they were trafficked in the first place, is because that was a gap and not available to them. And she really was passionate also about caring for these chickens. And it was really something that she loved and cared to do. So that was really powerful for me, is to just be invited into her home, in her village, to see her thriving and to see how much work she had done to really be able to provide for her and her family.
Going through that experience, that has to change you, right? Like to see that, to go through a raid, to see what they've been through, to see them, then back in their community, like you said, where that in and of itself is difficult to re-assimilate.
Yeah.
To have the respect, the empathy, like the courage, I mean, that's got to change you as a person. So when you look at like that experience, and obviously you've had many, how does that play a role then in your leadership? Because obviously that's going to drive it even deeper and further and, motivate you more, saying, look at this is what we're doing. We're changing lives. Like, we got to do more of this. We have a lot more to go, but that's got to change your approach in terms of, for yourself, that internal desire to really create impact and transform lives. So when you look at a moment like that, how did that change you?
Well, I think that a lot of people, when they think about trafficking, just to kind of start there, they get really angry. There's a lot of anger that comes up for people. And I think that's natural because of course, and especially when we're talking about children, I worked with a lot of minors, a lot of children, and saw a lot of really dark things, some of the darkest things I think that humans can see. And I was angry in the beginning, and I grieved a lot. And I would say that what ended up happening, which I really use, is to use that anger, and instead, because I actually have an opportunity to actually do something about it, is I transferred that anger into incredible passion and action to actually want to make a difference, and knowing that I actually have the ability to do that because I work and run nonprofits. And so that is where the magic really happens for me, is transitioning any sort of feelings of injustice, of anger, of feelings of just devastation for the oppression that people experience, even outside of trafficking. And really, instead of sitting in that, using that as momentum, using that as a force. I would say that, though, my experiences have made me a lot, although I feel like I have always been a compassionate person, I think it's made me a more compassionate person, more able to really listen, to really hear, to really take, for example, every staff member that I have and really try to love them for who they are individually. So I think it's really shifted the way that I care for my team. And it's really shifted, I think, my own level of motivation. I feel like I have an endless pool of motivation because of the things that I've experienced. And for me, it's not about me; it's about them, and that feels like the right way to spend my life. That's what I want to do, and it's the worthy use of my time.
I love just the illustration, though, around turning anger to action. I think that, for so many, wherever they are in the world, anger about certain things going on in their community, how do you turn that into a positive and take action in a meaningful way to create impact? So let's transition over to IDEAS. IDEAS is an acronym. So go ahead and give us some background on IDEAS.
So IDEAS stands for International Development and Educational Associates. And what we do is we really try to address societal and relational poverty. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that you can give someone a resource in a community and that will help for a temporary period of time. But what really draws me to international development is that it really addresses those root causes to actually change communities, change a culture, change the actual longitude of an individual's life, and hopefully for future generations. That's really the goal. So it's long-term, deep work that we do in communities that is meant to actually make a sustainable change without us once we leave. And so that's really the vision there. And it addresses, so when you really do that type of work, it addresses all areas. So again, that's why we look at what is relational and societal poverty and how can we really, look at those needs, but engage the community in helping meet those needs. So the areas that we work in that way are anti-human trafficking, agriculture, education, health and wellness, and disability care. And also as a piece of it is really investing in the relationships, because a lot of times relationships, when they're broken, is what can actually cause a lot of challenges that we see within people's lives and within communities. And so that's really important to us as well. It's really going back to kind of the heart of why we even exist on this earth.
I think one of the big keys for success, and this plays out obviously on all fronts, is relationships. We'll talk about that, obviously. The other thing, though, is you take an asset-based approach. You don't go in saying, here's what you need, because no one likes to be told. But when you invite them to be a part of the conversation and have ownership on the front end, it's amazing what can happen. And so talk about the asset-based approach and really how this plays out with ownership, which is really, to me, an important ingredient for success. That's a lesson that all of us can learn for success in our communities.
So I think I'll start with ownership, actually, because oftentimes when you look at different development initiatives, or what we would call relief-based initiatives that are really coming in to provide, and some of it's not assumed. If a community is starving, they need food, right? But what they also need in addition to food is maybe shifting their agricultural practices to be able to actually understand for example, things like climate change, it changes the way that the ground works. So there's only so far you can go when you do a relief-based approach. Whereas what you really want to, again, change the culture, change the community, change generations, you have to have that community ownership And how do people have ownership? They need to feel like they're valuable. They need to feel like they're bringing something to the table. And so that's why we really focus on an asset-based approach, because oftentimes, even in communities, they don't realize some of the assets that they have. And so that's why we do things like asset mapping. So we'll get together with a group of leaders within the community. Tell us what you think, who the leaders are in this community. What do they bring? What about this woman over here? She's a farmer. What are her talents that she brings to the table? So we really try to get creative. It's really meant to be community led. So we're not going to come in and say, this is the solution, which is a very ethnocentric also way of doing any sort of international work, is when we come in and say, we know what the solution is. The community likely already knows the solution. They may need help mobilizing resources. They may need help recognizing what the entire community brings to the table. But whether it be working in communities or even working in a local team here in the United States, without that level of ownership, they're really, it becomes surface level work. And so I think that it's so important, no matter what you're doing, that there is given that power to the individual to really have their own level of ownership and also feeling pride in what they're bringing to the table. So that's how we really believe in doing our work, and we really see the most difference there as far as long-term sustainability.
Few questions on that thread. One is, how is working globally changing your perspective locally? So when you look at everything you're doing, and many times you go out and you look at all the things going on, and then you come back to your hometown and you look around and realize, oh, a lot of these lessons that I'm learning here can be applied. It's just a matter of reframing my perspective. And so how is it changing your perspective locally with some of the things that are going on in your community locally?
That is a great question. I have never thought about that. But I think that my global work changes the entire lens of how I see the world. And so it really shifts how I interact with people in a local space, the level of appreciation and gratitude that I feel on a daily basis. I think it shifts the way that I view US-based challenges, because there is a different element of community internationally in a lot of places than we have here in the US. I think that there needs to be a little bit more mobilization and more unity as far as really tackling challenging things. I also think that there is I think one thing that I wish I could adopt and kind of bring over to the United States would be the overwhelming sense of gratitude. I mean, a lot of the places that I work now, the majority of my work is really focused in the Middle East, North Africa, and I've worked in South and Southeast Asia and Latin America. There is a different sense of being thankful for what you have around the world that is, I feel like it's very lost. And so I think that for me, it's changed the way that I want to live. It's changed the way that I want to interact with people. And also, I think there's a lot to be learned from different communities. I think I am always trying to become a better leader. So I take a lot of lessons from when I'm working with different local leaders to see how they work with their teams, how they interact, whether it be a community leader or an organizational leader. I'm always trying to learn from others to say, how can I become better and serve better as a leader in this space?
Yeah, and I think that's one why I love the media interviews, but it's also too, when I travel, I love, because every community has challenges. Mm-hmm. And it's how are they addressing those challenges and coming up with solutions. And it goes back to relationships and people raising their hand and say, I want to be a part of the solution, but then the solutions they come up with, the innovations. And I think that's the beauty, is when you start to travel, you realize every community has challenges. The way they're addressing them is different in some cases or similar. But then you take those back and you realize, wow, okay, that's really cool over there. That's really cool over there. It does. It changes the way you view challenges and opportunities. And it also changes the way you take action, which I think is all really cool, especially when you have a global perspective. So one more thing on that global perspective. When you talk about working in these communities, give us something that you've learned from someone locally in another country. And it can be around just something as simple as the way they look at something, the kindness, the appreciation, the respect, that attitude perspective, a little different. But what's something that you've learned either as a business innovation or just a thought change that is something that you've learned from somebody globally?
quite a few things come to mind, but I'll go with the first thing that came to my head. So I was working in Tunisia, and we were in a very, very poor area. And for those of you that don't know, Coca-Cola is gold all over the world, but it is also expensive. But it's oftentimes one of the more consumed beverages, sometimes even over water, especially in areas that, for example, don't have, are primarily Muslim, that don't drink, but also, of course, we see that all over Latin America as well. So it's very much a common beverage. Can be pricey, more expensive than water, of course. So I was in a very, very poor village in Tunisia, and then we were visiting this family. They lived in basically a hut, and they didn't even have electricity. And they gifted me a liter of Coke as a gift for coming to their home. And that was so generous to me that even out of them having nothing, and what we would determine as nothing, they wanted to bless their guests. They wanted to say thank you. They wanted to provide what little they had to me in that moment. And that was really life-changing for me in terms of generosity. And so really shifting the way that I view generosity. And generosity is so dependent on what each individual has to give. And for them to give me that Coca-Cola was as much as me giving someone $1,000. And that was really transformational for me. I think that when I worked in Nepal, which was a place I worked probably more than anywhere else, there was another survivor that we visited that had become very successful in pig raising, and she would inseminate the pigs and she would sell the pigs. And she was, came from a place of being trafficked to then having a thriving business with pigs, to the point where she made enough money in this very, very poor village to actually build a concrete multi-level home, which was absolutely an anomaly within this community and village. And what I really loved from her, that I really took away, is that she had so much pride in what she was doing. She had, again, so much ownership in what she was doing. And I think that also shifts the way that I sometimes view local leaders and how I want to lead in general, because so much of, I think, leadership as well is saying yes to hard things, stepping into hard moments, of course, having humility, but also being, taking your own ownership to say, if I really am going to lead well in this space, I have to really trust what I'm doing. And for her to come from a place of, such shame to a place of such pride, that was really moving for me. And I think about her all the time as far as really stepping into a place of something scary, something new, but really thriving within that space.
I think it also too, I was thinking as you're telling the Coke story, the Coca-Cola story, like Samaritan's Feet, where you take for granted, like, oh, it's a soda. Like everybody just goes to get a soda as part of their meal but yet for a family, like that's like you said, that's gold. And the cultural norm of being gracious and the generosity of that, or whether it's a pair of shoes, which for many, have never had a pair of shoes, like little things that we take for granted over here are an immense blessing around the world. And to understand that with pride, respect, empathy, understanding as you walk in, the cultural norms, understanding those is a big piece of it as well, which I think is an important storyline. When you look at how you've grown as a leader and your appreciation and respect and empathy and everything, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. For you looking back, at your 8-year-old self, for another young girl who's looking at this saying, I want to make a difference in this world. I want to, fight human trafficking. I want to help globally. What advice would you give now, knowing what you know now? What advice would you give to the young girl, your 8-year-old self, a young girl who says, I want to make a difference?
I love that. And because I also love mentoring young adults, because I recognize that my story is rare. I recognize that my parents seeing it and cultivating it is not everybody. They were intuitive in that. And I think that the world can really discourage dreams sometimes. And I would say to another 8-year-old or 10-year-old that if you really are passionate, stay committed, stay focused on that. Because again, it can be very hard to keep that fire going. So I would just say invest in it, really do not give up on it. And there's a lot of more tangible recommendations that I give when I do mentor young women. As far as, if you know you're passionate about something. So if I met a 10-year-old that wanted to work in trafficking, I would say, okay, let's start here. Let's start with you learning more, reading more, understanding. And then once you become old enough to actually have an internship, let's look at, is there a place where you can volunteer in a capacity, even if it means organizing their storage room in a safe home? That's a way for you to get exposure to that. Then I would say, let's look at when you start college or when you're in high school, the ways that you can actually engage. So it's all about building. If you have a fire, just because you may be young and don't have any other additional experience or expertise around that, it's all about building that and showing a history of that it isn't something you were just passionate about today. It's something that really has driven you and been something inside of you. And I know this sounds cliche, but I really believe if you feel passionate about something and so moved that you need to work in that space, that it can happen. It will happen. It's just about being patient, being dedicated, and really being wise about how you invest your time on the front end. I really believe that.
We had a chance to interview you recently on ideas, doing a deep dive there. So for anyone who wants to learn more and get involved and, really take the next steps, we'll wrap up with contact information, but everyone can go and check out that interview and do a deeper dive on ideas. Let's wrap up and go into a lightning round. So short questions, short answers, just a fun chance to get to know you better. What do you like to do to relax?
Oh, anything outdoors, everything and anything activity outside.
Do you have a favorite sport that you like to watch or play?
I don't really watch sports, but I love watching the World Cup and the Olympics. And sport-wise, I would say my favorite sport is probably rock climbing.
Nice. So when you have friends come to visit in the Nashville area, where do you like to take them? What are some go-to spots?
I want to impress them, but I don't want to take them to Broadway. So I'll take them to somewhere like Fifth and Taylor, a nice fine dining place, maybe Old Glory, a nice cocktail. So I always try to impress them with our food and beverage scene, and then hopefully get them a little outside so they can see just the richness of our Tennessee nature.
Where do you like to go to relax in terms of like a vacation spot outside of obviously the Middle Tennessee area?
I love to be in the mountains. So anywhere I can be in the mountains. So I love that my job is part-time in Colorado. So as high as I can be, elevation wise, I am happy.
Do you like to wake up early and get things done, stay up late? Where are you most productive?
I am most certainly an early bird. My mornings are sacred to me. That's when I get the most work done. So I usually wake up very early and cherish my mornings.
What is a recent book you've read?
I'm reading like 6 books right now. I haven't finished a lot of them. Right now, I've been more leaning towards reading leadership books. So I'm kind of dabbling between 5 of them right now, and that's been good, but I'm not completed with any of them.
Do you hate to lose or do you love to win?
I love to win.
All right. So what is a favorite quote or saying? And you don't have to get it verbatim, but what's a favorite quote or saying that inspires you?
The one I have on my fridge that I look at every day is gratitude turns what we have into enough. And I live by that, whether it's professionally or personally. And I think even when we're talking about winning and losing, I tell my team all the time, we're going to have losses, but we need to celebrate the wins, even if they're small wins. And I think that gratitude piece, knowing that we will lose in life many times, that gratitude piece is really helpful for me personally.
What's a fun memory for you and your mom and dad? So for you and your mom and dad, what's a fun memory that pops in? And it can be about one individually or just the two of them together, but what's a fun memory?
When I was little, my dad and we would listen to classical music, and we would make up a story around the music. So we would have different characters and we would go back and forth all the time. And that was really fun for us. That was kind of special between my dad and I. And then my mom and I, we would paint the same piece just differently. So we would maybe paint a scene, but then we would paint it the same and then we would compare. And I would say those two memories with my parents are really sweet to me.
Same question, but just for you and your siblings. So without the parents, and hopefully it's a story they know. What's one with your siblings?
Well, my older brother and I are 16 months apart. And so we're like Irish twins. We were best friends. And when we were growing up in Los Angeles, and there's a bit, not too much of an age gap, but 4 years before my younger brother was born. And my older brother and I would pretend we were unhoused, and we would stay outside from morning until night. We would refuse to come inside, and we would eat the wild onions in the grass, and we would eat the grapes from the grape vineyard around. And that was, we just felt like we had bamboo in the backyard. So we felt like we were living outside. That was really fun.
What's something you're looking forward to before the end of this year?
I'm getting married in September, so I'm excited about that.
Well, so that if you were going to mention that, I was going to mention that. That was about as softball as I could get on that.
I know. Sure.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wrap up as we talk about your impact and legacy, turning the anger into action. I mean, I think there's so many really cool through lines just with this interview, but obviously you are creating your legacy each and every day, and already so impactful, but yet so far still to go, right? So every single day creating your legacy. Many, many years from now, what do you hope that people say about you and the difference that you were able to make here on earth?
I really hope that my life exemplifies my heart for others, my heart to serve. And I hope my life is an example of that I really wanted to put others first to make their lives better, people that I may never even meet. And that is the only legacy I would hope. And that I love well through the service that I do. That would be what I hope people say about me, is that I really dedicated my life to that.
Well, go ahead and give everyone where we can go to follow you personally and professionally. So website, social media, where do we go to carry this conversation forward?
Great. So I'm on LinkedIn, Gabrielle Thompson. Find me there. And for ideas, our website is ideasworld.org. And feel free to send me a message there or on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with you.
Well, Gabrielle Thompson, thank you for all you do to power the good. You are a change maker indeed. Thank you for coming on the ChangeMakers podcast.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services is proud to power the ChangeMakers podcast. We're a people-first company that protects what matters most, the families, businesses, and trailblazers that keep our community going. As one of the nation's top independent insurance firms, Higginbotham is a single-source solution for business insurance, employee benefits, HR services, and personal insurance that's customized for you. We're here to serve you, the people you care about, and your community. Call 866-377-1959 or visit higginbotham.com.
Thank you for listening to the ChangeMakers podcast, produced by City Current and powered by Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services.
To learn more, to listen to past episodes, and to share your stories of other changemakers who are making a difference, visit citycurrent.com or call 901-321-1020.
Follow the conversation online using the handle @CityCurrent or the hashtag #PowerTheGood.